start with the approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval as presented. Do we need to drop an item from this? I'm looking at the superintendent here. No, we're good? Okay. I move approval as presented.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. There's no comments tonight. Moves us into E, board business, and we'll start with a stakeholder report from Mr. McCann. Good evening, Mr. McCann.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having both me and Steve Louder here to join tonight to go over the stakeholder report. I'll start with a few brief introductory comments, allow Steve to do the same, and then we can dialogue a little bit with the board about questions regarding this. I want to first start by thanking Chris and Emily for all of their help in facilitating a really robust process, and congratulating both of them and the school board for the effort that GAPS went to in order to allow anyone that wanted to participate in this process to have a vehicle to do so. We did a number of Zoom meetings, we did some in person, and of course we had the online stakeholder survey that was out for a couple of weeks. I also want to thank everybody that did choose to participate in this process. It's easy sometimes for folks, particularly this time of year, to think of all the other things that are pressing in terms of commitments on their time and stressors, and have the best of intentions and then not follow through on something that they really want to do. And so many people were able to come out and participate in this process, and I know that both Steve and I find that to be, one, we appreciate all the time that folks spend, but it also really helps us in that job that we're doing now as we begin that process of vetting candidates, because we have a much better understanding of the issues that are at play in Albany, the strengths of the school district, the challenges, and the places where there's still opportunities for growth, and the desires and the aspirations that stakeholders throughout the community and staff members and the board hold for the school system, and this exciting new chapter that we're about to come upon. I'd also just want to make sure that the board understands that this process, it should be seen as something where there are going to be concerns that are brought up, and you say, yeah, I'm aware of that, and it's nice to have that affirmation, or I've learned something new. In all cases, that has value. A lot of folks, one of the things that we heard throughout this process, though, is there is a real affinity for the area and a tremendous amount of local support for the school district as a whole. So I just wanted a few brief overarching comments. I'm going to turn it over to Steve for a few minutes, and then we're here to take questions and dive in a little deeper.
Thank you, Nathan. I have to echo everything that Nathan said about Emily and Chris. Excellent, Rob, very helpful for getting this process going. What I would say also is that sometimes board members who haven't seen this kind of process before will see this as a hypercritical report. The reality is, from our experience, and it's quite extensive, this is an average report. People who have concerns are going to come out and share those concerns with you. I don't believe that there's anything in here that board members or administration would be surprised to see. I think everybody's aware of that. But part of this process is to reach out and to ask those people, all individuals in the community, or as many as we can touch, to be part of this process and to share their thoughts and concerns. A lot of positive things, some issues and concerns that people have. The board should not feel that they are somehow bound by this particular document. This is just one of many ways this process allows input to be received by the board, and the board should be thanked for and congratulated for the fact that they are going through such an open and encompassing process. You know that it's impossible to please everyone, and people know that there are issues to be resolved and addressed, and they're in here as well as a lot of good things. Nathan brought up the fact that people have a lot of pride in the district, a lot of pride in the community. People love the community. They'll go to school, go away, and come back because they love the community. addressed as there are in all districts. But I think it's a good report. It's as far as critical or positive, it's the average kind of report that you see. So I don't want anybody to think that this is a negative thing for the district. I think it's a very positive thing for the district. The fact that you reach out and see some things that people have said to you that they would like you to address. It's really a very good report, and I think it's very informative, and I hope you get a chance to look at all the comments. Nathan, anything else?
Yeah, I echo all of that, and I think as you look through this, you know, if you were to take the very top line data at the end of this, that all rolls up, the things that we heard, and you see that in the executive summary, but really what stood out to me was thematically, if you talk about tell us the good things about the schools, there's a strong affection for the staff in gaps, which is always great. A number of people tie things back to an individual teacher, administrator, or staff member that they felt had exceeded expectations. And that was wonderful to hear that time and again throughout this. Also, it was really clear that people were thrilled to have their children back in school, and a number of staff were happy to see things coming back to a more normalized set of operations with in-person instruction. So I think that was really clear. And then I also heard many times throughout the process from the community standpoint, two things that that stood out. One, there was the pride in the bond passage and this affirmation that the community is willing to put its money where its mouth is in with and accepting the blessed burden of an increase in taxes to continue to invest in the school system. And also the sense that the community just does come together and responds well during moments of crisis. And I saw that too in just the number of representative-wise, the number of folks from your faith-based community and your partnerships that came out and participated in the stakeholder meetings. And were really active in those stakeholder meetings. So you've got some partnerships that clearly are strong with folks that feel like they're appreciative that their voice is heard during a superintendent search, and they really relish the opportunity to continue to partner with GAPS. And I thought that was really nice. And then when you take a look at the skills and the qualities and the characteristics of the next superintendent, I think a couple of things that really stood out. One, there were a number of people who recognized that this is a complex time for school systems in general. And so somebody with that's a seasoned administrator with superintendent or senior cabinet level experience would certainly be someone that we'd want to look at carefully and see that as a real value add for GAPS. But above all, somebody that purposely wants to come to Albany, not as the next stepping stone to a bigger district or another area in the state or someplace else regionally or nationally, but somebody that was seeking Albany because of the work that was being done in GAPS and that what the district was pursuing there. And I think that was really really important. And then ultimately, something that we heard in terms of the issues that incoming superintendent should be aware of, it's just this, and we see this a lot during the changing of the guard. It's just, hey, we need someone that's going to help us to build back trust in areas where there's some fractured relationships. We're going to need someone that we think is going to spend a lot of time listening before that individual rushes to make decisions. We want somebody that's going to be methodical in year one and really work on the relational aspects of each of the stakeholder groups throughout Albany. So those were just some of the top line takeaways that I had from doing a number of the stakeholder engagement activities. Steve, any other comments on that?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. I agree with everything you said. I think that in some ways this can be seen as people kind of taking shots at the district, but it really isn't. I think it's just really a reflection of the lack of I guess, confidence in what's going to happen in the future. There are a lot of things that once there's a change, people feel the disturbance, and
it's like there's a fear of that future. So I think that what Nathan said about the next superintendent is true, albeit I'm not sure that the person has to have district office experience. I think they really need to be the right fit. And that really comes down to more of the personal skills, personality, about listening, about being able to be fair, about being able to explain why they make certain decisions. So communication is important, listening, the approachability, visibility in the community. They want that person to be out and about in the schools and in the community. They want that person to be a member of the community, not somebody who's going to be living, an hour down the road and, driving to and from. They want that person to be all in for the GAPS community. And I think that's a very common thing as well. But again, somebody who is fair, who fights for justice for all, especially listens to staff members, teachers, classified staff administrators, somebody who's got a work-life balance, because these jobs are all-encompassing. They can really take over your life, and that can cause problems for the next superintendent. They want somebody with a sense of humor, somebody who is appreciative of all staff, not just the teaching staff, the custodians, the bus drivers, somebody who understands how important those roles are. So this is a person that it's more than just their experience, where they were in a position. It's more about who they are as an individual and what they can bring to the table. I think that we're already beginning to see applicants. We're also recruiting applicants heavily. We have a lot of interest from some very, very good people who fit this profile, interestingly enough. Again, open door policy, transformational leader, allows people to express their opinions without fear, which the board actually has done here in this process, because people were able to express all manner of thoughts without any, I guess, fear of having it being held over their head. But it's a very important part of the process, and I think if the board takes a look at it closely, they will get information about where some individuals are. What we also found was some individuals took advantage of multiple venues. So you'd find 2 or 3 or 4 people showing up at these meetings, and I want to make sure that I say, and I forgot earlier to say that what I said was we met with 20 stakeholder individuals and groups. It's really more 20 groups and individual stakeholders. So that should have been reversed, because there were lots of groups, lots of group opportunities. So I think it's a fair representation of thoughts and concerns. And of course, what you tend to miss are the people who are just happy. Oftentimes, people who show up for this are people who have concerns or issues they want to discuss and share. But that's a very important part of this process. I think that's it, Nathan. I think if the board has questions, we probably should go there.
Great. John? I did have one question. On some of the stakeholder groups, you had quantity of people who responded, and others you did not. I was just curious why that number was left off on the other groups, or?
Well, that was me. Nathan actually was very good at recording the number of people that he met with, and I unfortunately forgot to write those numbers down on my groups. But there were some groups that were small and some groups that had around 8 or 10 people. So that's my fault. I take responsibility for that. I apologize. No other reason than I just forgot to write that number down.
I just wanted to get a sense of the number of respondents is all. So.
I think it was a reasonable number. Probably could have had more people. There were a couple groups that had no one. I think the student trustee didn't show or wasn't able to attend. I had one student show up in my group. I think the biggest group that we failed to really connect with were the Hispanic or Spanish-speaking parents. And for whatever reason, we didn't get a big showing of that group. Other than that, I think it was a fair and reasonable representation. Nathan?
Agreed. And it is, none of this is ever to try to, we're trying to give you a fastball right down the middle. And so there's no bias one way or the other. There's nothing on the ball. And so there's no attempt at lipstick on the pig, so to speak. But it is fair to say that this process, and I think this is something that sometimes I just try to always put myself in the position of the recipient at the end of this. It's a board member looking at this, and you're going to personalize this a little bit. And Steve did a nice job of already, like, you ask these questions, it begs an answer. And that's what's so nice about this process, and so nice about allowing a couple of consultants to come in, because there can be a real cathartic benefit to this too. It shows the district's listening. It allows people an opportunity to go and share some things that maybe they feel like they haven't been heard previously, and now it's validated, because they'll be able to go through this report and actually find their comment and say, oh, it was documented, I was heard. And that can be beneficial, and that speaks volumes. The other place this is important, besides just Steve and I seeing this and having a better sense, is candidates that are really interested in the district. They're going to look over this meticulously. They're going to study this to get the sense for the community and the voice of the community. And this is what is going to draw those people that are the ideal fit in. They're going to look at all this and say, I'm excited to get to work on these issues with this group of people. And so, and Steve, it is fair to note, there were multiple folks that attended multiple meetings. So, but I want to make sure that both, on behalf of both Steve and I appreciated every meeting, anyone that was willing to come out and talk about the schools and what GAPS could do to continue to enhance the product that they deliver for each and every student. You always want more people to be involved in the process, but I do think, again, for both Chris and Emily, this was a lot of individual meetings, and for some people, just knowing that they had that opportunity is sufficient to say, okay, I wanted to make sure there was an opportunity to weigh in. Now that I know there is, I'm more comfortable with the process.
I guess a little bit more what I was getting at is, do you feel like this was a large sample, an average sample, or a small sample?
I'd say it was an average sample, wouldn't you, Nathan?
Yeah, probably on the low end of average, given how large Albany is. 55,000 people just in Albany itself, right? This isn't a tremendous amount of people. I was pleased in the last week of the online survey, that picked up noticeably. So it's, we've both seen far fewer people participate. Maybe like to have seen another 50 or 75 people sprinkled between the online and the surveys. What I would have liked to have seen is those community forums that last night that when we were down there in person in Albany. It would have been nice to have a few more people show up there that night. But it was right butting up against the Thanksgiving break, and it was a pretty wet night.
Nathan, I have to say to the board that, in my experience, if you had another 50 people, it would not change the outcome of the survey. It would be the same information. So I think what you've got is, you've got a good snapshot from the concerns of the individuals that show up. This is only one piece of the puzzle. But I think more importantly is, it does send a message that this is an open process, that the board is interested in gathering this information so they can make a good decision. And it's important to note too, we told people that asked the question, is this an open search? And we say absolutely it's an open search. There is no foregone conclusion about who's going to be the next superintendent. And I have to tell you, again, we're getting interest from some very, very talented and very good people. So the other thing I would say is that, well, we only have 5 current applications. A couple of them are very interesting. And you don't get the majority of your applications until the very last week, maybe the last few days. But you will have some very good people. And I think you'll be pleased with it. And I think you'll be pleased with the process at the end of it as well.
I just have one more comment. My favorite comment, I read all 79 pages, was that the new superintendent should have skin thicker than the crust of the earth. And I thought that was a very interesting comment, and it made me laugh. And there was a lot of comments in there about thick skin, but that one was the one that caught my attention.
Yeah, yeah. But this is normal kind of stuff for a superintendent. They, very rarely do you get people coming up to you and saying, hey, good job, we love you, and usually they come up and tell you what you need to do and how to fix things. And if you don't have the ability to deal with that, then you probably shouldn't be a superintendent. And I would say that there's nothing in here that would scare away anybody who wants to be a superintendent. Nathan said it, he said, I know now what kinds of things I need to do. And again, a lot of it's about communication, listening, being fair, being visible, being approachable.
Gentlemen? No.
So I would just ask, we'll continue the process conversation. Are you sticking with us for that, or is it ask questions of you now, or lose that opportunity for tonight?
Are you talking about the other items on the agenda?
Correct.
Certainly I can stay. I don't know Nathan's schedule, but I'm certainly available. He says he's available too. Absolutely.
So I have no more questions at this time, if you'll stay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, gentlemen, I appreciate it. And we'll move down to E2, Qualifications and Duties of the Superintendent. Yes, thank you. So this is Board Policy CBA, and we had this earlier, excuse me, I apologize. This is Board Policy CBA. It's a policy that we had before the board once before. It talks about the qualifications and duties of the superintendent. It lays out 4 expectations for the superintendent, and then there are a list of duties, specific functions, general functions that run, I think, for 39 different items. I do think that those are all important for the board to look at and remember as you're moving through the process, just as is what the consultants just reported. But specifically the qualities and duties 1 through 4 listed at the top of the policy item. Keeping those and having those will determine some of what you get in your advocate field.
Mr. Chair, so I think all these things that it says, all 39 points have merit. I'm a little bit concerned that we have 39 points about what it doesn't say, and that is that we would hope that the next superintendent do everything within their power and authority to make sure that kids get a quality education. Was that addressed in many other documents, and I don't need to amend this? Tell me, please, somebody tell me where that's addressed.
Chair Nyquist, I don't think I can specifically tell you right now as we sit where that is addressed, but I can assure you it is addressed in some other documents and board policy.
Thank you.
Sure. Would it be, I had several people reach out to me and suggest another item for this, which was to basically improve academic performance on state testing as one of the superintendent's duties, to keep an eye on. And as me, you spent some time with us, Senator Yee, and was quite concerned, and some other people have reached out and were quite concerned about our test scores. Is that something that we could amend or add to this policy to include?
What happens with this policy is certainly within the rights of the board to amend, and typically what we do is you would suggest that amendment this evening, and then it would be up for a vote at the ensuing meeting. And so we could suggest those, if you wanted to suggest some changes tonight, we could do that. We'd note them and bring it back for board consideration at our next board meeting, which is the, can you help me with that? December 13th. Thank you.
Yeah, if you worked on the wording of that, we could bring it for the policy committee, which we have a meeting later this week, and then we bring it back in front of the board. That would work great.
Do we need to take any action tonight as to, or just agree to work on the wording and do that, and is there anything else we need to do?
We can just have a consensus for that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll work on some wording for that. Go ahead.
So I would just ask our consultants to graciously state on the line, anything in this document or our comments that are a good thing or a bad thing in the way of finding the best possible superintendent that we can.
I have not seen that document. I think the problem is that superintendents are responsible for all things. They're responsible for academic achievement, for construction, etc. And if you limit it, even though you have 39 things, there's going to be something that is, not covered by those 39 items. I think the best policies are general. Your administrative regulations or your goals for the board become much more goals for the superintendent become much more specific and targeted. So policies, good policies, are general and not too detailed. So if you can collapse those 39 down to 4 or 5 items, you're probably going to be better off because as they are more general, they cover more things. I do think that based on our experience with our community staff meetings, you're looking for a person not with a specific set of experiences, prior superintendent, district office, high school principal, whatever that may be. What you're looking for is a person that has the right skill set. So if you if you limit yourself in your policy, which by the way, the board can ignore their policy because it's your policy and you can change it. If you limit yourself to that policy, you arbitrarily stop individuals from rising to the top or being reviewed by the board. So again, I think that a policy should be as general as possible and cover the important topics. Clearly, student achievement, curriculum and instruction, and budget. I mean, those are all things that are the superintendent's responsibility. Nathan?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Ultimately, what you're looking for is the superintendent, really 2 roles. The first is one that maybe is most obvious to people. That's the chief executive of the district. And so the board employs but one person, and that's the superintendent. And then ultimately the superintendent, through the administrative organization of the district, is responsible for the employment and supervision of everyone else in the district. Second thing you're looking for, and I think this is really an important point for every school board, is a good superintendent recognizes that they're also the advisor and counsel to the school board, and that they're there to help nurture a well-formed team that collaboratively works together in the best interest of students. And it's a little bit like being a dance instructor because you lead while you follow. It's this idea that ultimately the superintendent is accountable to the board, the collective board, not individual board members, but the collective of the school board. The board is going to take some of its leadership cues from the superintendent because that's your advisor and counsel. And so that should come through during the entire interview process. And I think your best candidates are much less concerned about what's in your duties and qualifications policy than they are in what the operational norms will be in working with the board. And a lot of that will be vetted through the interview process and getting a feel as each of those candidates sits with the board collectively.
Gentlemen, I had a question for you. So the qualifications for the superintendent is 4 things. They have a license as a superintendent, a master's degree or higher in education, successfully teaching elementary or secondary school, and has been a superintendent or worked in a central office. So I come from a military background where you can be a communications commander, and then all of a sudden you're a military police commander when they change you. Having these qualifications is excellent, and I appreciate our former math teacher as our superintendent. It comes in handy quite often, but it also limits our scope. Are these pretty standard And would you think it would be vital to have these?
Well, so let me give you an example. One of the best loved superintendents in the last 15 years for Seattle Public Schools was a man who was a retired Navy commander. He had no background in public education, but they absolutely loved his leadership and loved what he was able to do for the district. Unfortunately, in his case, his tenure was short because he contracted cancer and passed away. But I think the concept here is that there are oftentimes educators who feel that you won't understand what it's like to be in the classroom or what our feelings are if you haven't had that experience. Having said that, I think that if you limit yourself to only those people, you get a slice, you narrow the scope of the individuals that you can look at. So minimally, and I think based on the kind of input we got from your teaching staff and your administrative staff, they would appreciate somebody with the experience in the classroom, somebody who's been an administrator at some level. But I don't think that anybody ever said they had to be a prior superintendent or have district office experience. I never heard that. I just heard, we want these qualities. We want this kind of leader. And so if you artificially put those requirements in, you exclude people who might be the right fit, because that's what this is about. It's about the right fit, the right leader with the right skill set. Nathan? You're muted. Nathan, you're muted. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, my controller wasn't working. I would agree with that, and you've got the in lieu language that allows you some flexibility. I think there were some folks, if you look through the comments, that talked about experience, but I think they were talking about it more in terms of they're going to need to have the leadership chops, whether they've technically been the superintendent before. And I think there are many cases where it helps the street credibility with a number of the internal staff when the person's walked in those shoes, whether it's in the classroom, it's an administrative training at the building level, and then ideally, many people feel more comfortable if they've had some central office experience. But I wouldn't let any of that get in the way of the right person. It's much like, someone has to, they can't be a superintendent with experience until they get experience. So everyone has to have a first job at each of these levels. Number two, there are many times when a team goes out and they've hired a head coach that has been an offensive and defensive coordinator previously, but doesn't have that head coaching experience because they were more focused on the right fit, looking for the person with those intangibles. And so I appreciate this discussion because a lot of what you're trying to do is make sure that the science of the hiring process is is acknowledged throughout this, but also recognizing that there's got to be the flexibility for the art of the process too, which is that feel and going through. We're going to do all that due diligence that's part of the science, really diving into each candidate to make sure that what they're representing themselves to be is been tested through their career. That yes, if they say they're a collaborative team builder, that they have evidence where they've been a collaborative team builder. But you're going to want to spend some time with that candidate, really getting a sense of, will we work well together? And do we both have the courage, the board and the candidate, to share our expectations of each other, and do that before a contract's been signed, before a job's been offered, so that you feel like, no, this is on both sides. We're principled enough to stand up and share our thoughts, and there's that mutual respect that's going to allow us to put aside maybe some individual disagreements that we'll have, and continue to look at what can we do to make sure that we serve all kids in the district. Because the other thing, and Steve touched on this, thing that if you look through this, it was a lot more about, we were really looking for someone that all really means all. And so we're less concerned about labeling students and more concerned about making sure that every single student who leaves our system well-equipped so that they can go out and pursue their ambitions. And, you know, that may come from someone that has not done anything beyond the teaching in, say, middle school principal ranks. It may come from someone that's a sitting superintendent. Possibly could come from somebody that has experience in other professional fields.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome. Yeah, the short answer is, don't limit yourself.
With what you gentlemen are saying, and with, you know, my opinion of this, I would want to take off that number 4 as a requirement to apply for the position. I don't think you need to be a previous superintendent or in the central administration office to apply for the job. That obviously gives you another realm of experience, but I don't think it means you know, it shouldn't limit the people who apply.
I would concur with that, and also look at number 1, where it says a current license that qualifies an individual as a superintendent, and add, or the ability to obtain.
So where are we? Agenda-wise, are we still on E2?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
So if we have any other input on kind of this document?
Well, just that the comments of the vice chair talk about a specific board policy, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not inside this document. Is it on the agenda tonight to have that conversation? Is that?
Yes. Yeah, review and discuss policy CBA. So that's on the CBA policy. It's number 4 on the CBA policy.
Okay.
I agree. You know, who would want to limit? I'm not even sure where this comes from, frankly. Perhaps maybe a smaller district may want this. You wouldn't want to limit your who you look at. No, I don't think anyone would. This document and some of the things that are very detailed, I think, will inform me when it comes time to interview. Once we get to that point, you know, this is here. It's a suggestion. How would you and look at their experience? That doesn't quite maybe meet number 4, but you know, I can agree. I don't think we need. I think it's a question of how we amend that, how we go through the process of amending that number 4, and maybe adding to number 1, clarifying that that licensure part. But yeah, I agree. I concur.
I believe if we're all in agreement of that premise, we could work on that policy and bring it back for next board meeting. I think that'd be great.
Hey, Mr. Chair, what I'm hearing is a small addition to number 1 around, or the ability to qualify, and strike number 4. We can bring that back for your consideration at the board meeting on the 13th.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Moving on to E3. This is Mr. Morris and Mr. Thompson.
I think we talked about this a little bit at last board meeting, and I think what we came to an agreement upon, for the most part, was to have it be 11-member unit with no names attached, but would comprise those groups that we have listed.
Agreed. No names, but the 2 students.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Have we been able to locate the people to fill the slots?
So
Yeah,
officially, we haven't got applicants until December 6th.
Okay.
So we're, it's out there, but it's a draft way we get it. On the 6th, or after this meeting, ask Chris, she's the expert, it'll become live. And then we, the search committee, will bring our recommendation of the list of people to, I believe, the board on the 10th. And you guys can approve it, or us guys too, can approve it, or we can talk about changing it. But in this list, it shows where these people will come from.
You had a question?
Yes, sir.
So, if I might, I think it's important to note and continue to reiterate that your interview committees do not rank or select your candidates. They will give you their feelings about the strengths and weaknesses of each of the candidates. It's important that they know that from up front, that this is a board decision, and the board alone makes that final decision. However, you desire to have input from a broad range of your constituent stakeholders, students, teachers, community members, etc. But again, it's important that everyone knows from the very beginning that they don't get to select or rank the candidates. They're going to make a list of the strengths and weaknesses of each of the candidates for your consideration. Once you've had your interviews, the board has had their interviews, and given a preliminary decision, you look at that information to confirm what you've seen in the candidates, and if what you see from your stakeholder interview team really different than what you thought, you get a chance then to reconsider your decision or your selection. But again, it's advisory only, and that's a critical piece because people will often misunderstand that, and at the end of the process say, well, you didn't listen to us. Well, yes, the board will listen to you, but it is the board's decision. So that's a critical piece. I just think that's important to continue to say wherever the board talks about this stakeholder interview team.
Another point that I know you both have emphasized before is that this group will get to see 4 to 8 candidates or interview 4 to 8 candidates, but they're not going to be telling people who those 4 to 8 candidates are. This is confidential because we want to keep as many applicants applying as possible, and these people don't want their names out there, especially if they're from local nearby. The last thing they want to do is upset their current community.
And that's true. And what I would say to that is it will depend on the number of individuals you wish to interview in the process. It could be that you end up with 4 individuals that you want to interview totally. I mean, let's assume that there are 8 or 10 applicants that we bring to you that we say are a fit. And the board then selects 4 of them. At that point, you could, and the candidates would understand that they're 1 of 4. They would prefer to be 1 of 2, of course, but 50% is better than 25%, but chance of winning. But it's if you get it down to that kind of number, you would only go through 1 round of interviews versus 2. If you're doing a 2-round interview to kind of first round sort some people out, then you get finalists moving forward, then it's clearly confidentiality is very important at that point. It also is important that they don't talk about what they see, what they know about the individuals, because it is the hiring process, and that is important. That's all confidential. Once you get to the finalist group, we recommend that those individuals are named and vetted publicly before the final decision of the board. We would suggest that they meet with the stakeholder groups individually, and it depends on how you decide to run your interview day, but it's very common that individuals meet with, let's assume, classified staff at 7:30 in the morning. You meet with maybe administrative team, let's say at 11 or 12 after a tour of the facilities. There's an afternoon presentation to the community. It can be done via Zoom if Omicron becomes more prevalent, or it can be done in person. We always advise it to be recorded and posted so that people can have their input, again, for the board to advise them in their decision-making process. But again, at that point, those people, be they 2 or 4, become very public, and that's an important part of this very open process that the board has embarked upon. And at that point, the individuals understand and are willing to take that risk. Up until that time, they expect confidentiality. I hope that's clear.
It is, I think.
It's real important.
Mr. Chair, if I can see that I know that this is going to be a robust discussion, but I also know it's agenda item E5. And so I'm hoping that maybe we could touch on what's currently on the agenda and then come back around to E5, just a thought, if that's possible. I don't mean to stifle the discussion because it's a good discussion, but I just want to make sure that we're covering the agenda.
Sure, as long as these guys will stay. Because I think we need them for E5.
Yes,
not-
agreed.
Okay.
One last question on this. On the 11-member board stakeholder committee, will they be anonymous or will they be known by the public when they're selected?
They'll be known.
Okay.
All right, no more questions on that?
So I think, do we need to do a motion for that, to approve the 11-member? Okay. I would move that we, our interview team comprised of 11 members, as shown, well, plus one student on here, Chris, to what is shown. So as shown, but we add one student.
And the names.
We don't have no names.
Okay, so you're doing 2 students and the rest of them are the way they are?
Yep, yes.
Okay.
I would second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move to E4, move to approve community interview team information and application and confidentiality agreement as presented.
So moved.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. To clarify, this is approval of the document as presented to us tonight.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Now we're at TE5.
So gentlemen, on this scenario number 1 that was provided from Steve, my only concern is how long a day that is. You know, we're talking about from 7 till 8:30 is when they're actually doing their interview with the board. That seems like a bit much. I'm all about getting to know them, but wow.
8:30 is when they're starting their interview with us,
Yes.
just to be more clear. And yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a long day, it's a big job, lots of days in the life of a superintendent are long days. I think you plan it so you do take into account a person's need to take some bio breaks. And there are opportunities throughout the day where they can grab a drink of water and rest for a few minutes and just kind of collect their thoughts. But we talked about this in our first get-together. The more fingerprints you can have on this process, the more people that feel like they've really had a say, it just gives a healthy tailwind to that incoming superintendent when they start, where you have lots of people that are rooting for and championing the success of that individual in the school system. And so they are fully prepared for that. It's also a chance for them to get as many touches with the community as well and make sure that this is the job that they think it is. So the person you want will look at that day and acknowledge it's a long day, but they're going to also have the, it's like competing in, it's different than practice. They're going to have that extra little juice running through them throughout the day because they're excited to be there. And Steve is exactly right. The more that you can get them in front of groups, and it's an opportunity like at lunch too. There could be a couple of board members that sit and have an informal lunch. And you could have 2 with one of those finalists and 2 with a different finalist. And it's just each of those are different opportunities in different settings to spend time with the superintendent. And throughout the day, each of those various groups has an opportunity to weigh in, again, with just feedback. These are things we really liked about candidate A. These are potential questions or concerns we have. And then the board gets all of that stuff at the end, and there are extra data points that allow you to, it's an opportunity to calibrate too. Everything I heard during my time with the candidate seems to also be what other people heard. That's really encouraging. wait a second, I think I'm missing something here. Lots of our stakeholders have this concern, I didn't pick up on that. As a minimum, during our executive session, when we're talking about this as board members, you're saying, that's a question I want to bring up with the rest of the board. And the process allows for that. And we are confident, candidates know that are pursuing a job like the GAPS superintendency, that it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, I think really where I'm coming from on this is the first real opportunity that we've all got to see it. I would like it to be something that the search committee could look at, and then at the next board meeting, bring to you guys to approve.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of thoughts. First, let me ask process-wise, we get down to the final interview, will the final candidates all know who each other are?
So the answer to that is yes. Unless the board chooses to keep them completely private, which we would not recommend for so many reasons, especially since there's a background feeling that somehow there's a fix-in, that a certain person's already been selected. I think what you want to do is be open and public as you can about all of this. In our recommendation is yes, that those finalists, be they 2 or 4, everyone knows, all the candidates know who they are, and it becomes very public at that point. And that actually, again, as Nathan said, brings a lot of people to the process and say, this was an open process, it was a fair process, yes, the board got to make the final decision, but we all got a chance to give our thoughts and opinions as part of their decision-making.
Okay. I do have some concern about people dropping out. If they're finalists and they're handicapping who the other finalists are and don't want to divulge to their current employer that they're looking to leave them. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I would be much more comfortable if we built into the timeline a second interview opportunity should we need it. Because
certainly you can do that. You can again, it comes down to the number of people that you see that you want to interview, number one, and number two, getting back to the earlier question or comment that Nathan made, if there is some question, there's a disconnect between what you're hearing, what you've heard from your stakeholder committee, or maybe from comments of the video that was placed on the district website, and people make comments. If there's a disconnect between what you saw and what people are saying, clearly you would want to come back and have a second round interview. It's really very flexible. The process we have is confidential up until you select who you want to interview, usually somewhere between 2 and 4. At that point, the names are out. All the individuals know at that point that they're in the game and their name is going to be public. We talk to them before they go to the board. We tell them what the process is. If they have any concerns, they tell us up front. We also ask them questions like, if you're offered an interview, will you come? If you're offered the contract, will you accept pending contract negotiations? We will not bring you people who will not be willing to come and be your superintendent if they have those concerns. You won't have people, very few people are going to say, I want to just put my toe in and not my whole body. If they're not in it to win it, you don't want them. And I know that there are processes where the board does this all in executive session, and then they announce who the superintendent is. We just can't, in good conscience, make that recommendation to you based upon everything we've heard and seen in the district. We would recommend that this process be as open and public as can be, and that starts with after you've selected who you're going to interview as finalists. Again, it depends on, you can have a preliminary interview, but then those finalists are going to have to be public.
That's all well and good. but thoughts on adding an opportunity for a second interview. I just, in my experience in another life, the best hire that our group ever made was we added a second round of interviews because something just didn't feel quite right. And my fear is that should the board want to do that after the first round of interviews, but it's not in this timeline, that's not going to go over very well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I appreciate, I think if the board comes out and it just is clear with the community that we are committed to an open and transparent process, and we're gonna take, and we wanna do this in an efficient manner, but we will not leave any stone unturned. And if that means we've gotta call back one or more candidates for an additional interview, because it's such an important decision that we wanna get right. Every reasonable and rational person in Albany will understand that. And you don't want to be beholden to a process that's so scripted that if you get that concern, you feel like you back yourself into a corner. I applaud you for saying, I want to make sure we get this right. The board should make sure that it has a process that allows for that flexibility. You know, no one says you have to hire this person on such and such a date. You hire the person when you're ready to hire the person. You have the right person there. And I would say if I was a community member in Albany, that's what I would be expecting from the board. And I would understand that that means that there's some latitude that you can't necessarily predict perfectly what that timeline is going to be. Nor today is it imperative whether or not you interview, like you've got the central office administrators meeting with superintendent candidates at 9:30. You know, whether that, you know, that could be at 1 o'clock when it all ultimately comes down to that. Those are details that really aren't nearly as important as the commitment from the board that says we want this to be open and transparent.
And I think if you say a second interview, if necessary, certainly that covers the base. And that allows you, and people know up front that there could possibly be a second interview if the board chose to do so. So you leave your option open. If you come to a consensus decision after the first round of interviews, so be it. But if you have questions and you need to do a second round for whatever reason, it's there for you.
So gentlemen, I appreciate the interview process to gauge the stamina of this incoming superintendent. I'm a little uncomfortable with the 8:30 formal interviews with the board. I'd like to see that bounce to the next day, like 8:30 a.m. formal interviews with the board, because I really, first I want our union, our administrators, our stakeholders, our city officials to have that time to report back to the board of, hey, this person is a really good person. You know, I like their input. And I think we're gonna need that time. And I don't want to interview somebody after an exhaustive day of canned answers and canned speeches. I would want them fresh on their game. And to give our stakeholders, all you know, these nearly 200 people that they're gonna be meeting with that day, to give them time to email or text or phone call the board. But I'm sure our committee will do some polishing for us.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a very, very workable thing to do. What time any of those things happen, you know, our recommended day is a very long day. It also gives you information about their stamina, their ability to deal with the role of the superintendent, which, as Nathan said, many days for superintendent are 12 and 14 hours. That's just the way it is. And they need to function whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. Now, having said that, I think the point that is well taken here is, how do you get that information back to the board before they make their final decision? Well, the board doesn't have to make the final decision at the end of their interview. They can make that final decision, or they can make a preliminary decision, or at least come to some kind of consensus, pending information that they receive from the constituent groups. So you can come back in a day or two and do that. I would not suggest you wait a long time for lots of different reasons, but there should be sufficient time for that information to get to the board. One of the ways of doing that is the public meetings, be they Zoom meetings that are online and recorded and posted, or some other venue. You want time to get that information back to the board. So you could do those Zoom meetings earlier in the day or the week, and then more of the meetings and interviews later. So for example, you could do Tuesday Zoom meetings, Wednesday tours, that sort of thing. So you can spread it out. You don't want to take too many days in the process, but there is some flexibility for sure, depending upon how the board chooses to move forward. And again, our recommendation is just that, it's a recommendation. It works and it works very well, but in the end, it's your process.
So I just, tell me if I have this right, how, we're going to have dinner with multiple candidates. No?
So you would not have dinner with multiple candidates on one day. If you follow a schedule where you have one candidate per day, let's assume you have two candidates, you would have that one candidate go through everything, have an informal dinner, and then a formal interview after. And the reason we recommend that is that you get to see that person in different situations. Informal is informal, and you can talk about, you like baseball, or do you like to fish? What do you like to do? You can talk about all kinds of things, it's just back and forth. And then you move into a formal interview, and that gives you a different take on the individual. So, as Nathan was saying earlier, what you want to do is try to get to know these individuals so that you can make the right choice about fit. This is about fit. This is not about, do they have the ability to do the job? Everybody we bring to you is going to have the ability to do the job. You want the person that you feel most comfortable with, that is a fit for not only the board, but for the community as well. So you would not have dinner with more than one candidate at a time. If you want to do it on a single day, you might have to schedule different kinds of meetings. I think Camus did lunch with a candidate and then dinner with a different candidate. So they did it, they broke it up. So again, it comes down to the number of people and how the board wants to fill the days, how many days they have to do this job. It's an important job, but sometimes people don't have multiple days, to give to the process.
So my next question then is, anytime three of us are together, it has the potential of being a public meeting, and so
This is the hiring process. It's an executive process. It depends on what you're talking about, but this is the hiring process. So when you're hiring individuals, it's not a public process. I mean, you're not making any decisions. You're meeting with people. Now, Rob can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we've run this process like this I've been doing it for 7 years here and for 30 years before, so in different states. But you don't have to worry about public meeting. You have to post that you're meeting, but it's not open to the public because it is part of the hiring process. Nathan or Rob, anybody want to chip in?
Ron, did you have comments you wanted to add before?
No, I agree with Steve that it's allowable, and again, that I've seen that done many places.
So, board members, why don't you provide your input to me and Michael, and we'll work on a couple alternatives, ways we can do it and bring it to you guys. We can kind of make it work.
So I'll tell you, for me now, I have an instantaneous reaction to that, is that we take the dinner and the informal and not a public meeting out of it, and when we get to the end of the day, for the interview, we're doing an interview. so the public can see it, and there will be no wondering in that final phase what did or didn't happen or get said in executive session.
I guess some of it is like when we've gone to conferences, we all go to dinner together with the superintendent. You can't talk about school board business, but it kind of falls in that realm.
If I could summarize, I think Director Nyquist is just saying, take out something that, one, makes the day a little easier to manage, but two, and most importantly, takes out something that might lead to speculation. Am I right, that your final
Yeah.
decision was swayed in that last?
Yeah, I think we made a commitment to limit executive sessions to the, and I think we've only had one since then. It's like, why go there?
Keep it in the.
If you've had an interview, we've had an opportunity for a second interview if we need it, and then the candidate is going to spend the day in town talking with all kinds of different groups. That, for me, that day, we should go from there. If you want to build in a break for the candidate and we do a 7 o'clock, but this is the most serious business decision that we'll make. And I hate to give any opportunity for any speculation on any of it, on that final day for sure.
I guess my question too is what of this process is going to be done in executive session?
So it is, Oregon allows, in fact, I'm fairly certain it's the first identified of the reasons that an Oregon school board can go into executive session is the consideration of the employment of a public official. So, just like we don't hold, the public doesn't come in and watch the interview for the bus driver or the teacher, you certainly could have this very transparent process and then say, hey, we also want an hour in private where we can ask questions and get like an authentic dialogue. It's a part of the process. It's not the entirety of the process. And the board would be making a huge miscalculation if it didn't take into account every other part of the process throughout this. But it's what school districts across the country do. So it's not like someone can say that you're not being transparent, but I would argue that that is not something that can stick. People can say whatever they want to say, but in that case, the board's just using due diligence and saying we want to have the actual interview be like we would with any of our other interviews. It's just the members of the interview team. You have this committee that's going to be part of asking questions at this time. You're going to have the superintendent meeting with folks at these various times. There's also an opportunity for the superintendent candidates to meet with the board. If you want those to be in public, you absolutely can. And there are districts that do that. I know that in the Shelton School District up in Mason County last spring, they had a gallery of folks that watched during the interview process. That's perfectly fine too. And so their interviews were held in person during that, during that semifinal round to elicit who the finalists were going to be. Each of those comes with, okay, do I want to be one of, in that case, 5? And that can sometimes scare a candidate away if they know that they're going to be publicly vetted at that moment in time. Others are like, yes, I really want this job. I'm very comfortable going through that process. So I just want to make sure the board feels like it has options, because you do. Ultimately, it's your decision collectively how you want to run the actual interview that the board conducts with each of these candidates.
That is not the recommendation of the firm. It is your process, and you're allowed to do that if you choose to. We don't recommend that for lots of, we think, good reasons. Our process works, and the people come and they stay because they're a good fit. But again, as Nathan said, we absolutely are here to help you with your process, and that is, you can do that, but that would not be our recommendation to have a gallery of individuals.
So, to be clear, I completely understand the need, the practical need to do the first round of interviews for us in executive session because of the relationship between the applicants and their current employers. I'm not personally, I'm just one, but I'm not nearly as comfortable with the final interview, the final candidates, and us making a decision or not that day. So I'll just leave it at that. We can all think about it and go from there.
When you bring this back, will you asterisk what is recommended executive session? Any other discussion on this? Okay. And we're gonna bring it to the superintendent for F1.
So are we,
Go ahead and release the consultant.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being
Thank
here
you,
with us
gentlemen.
tonight.
Appreciate
And,
it.
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, on F1, this is a GAEA Memorandum of Understanding, and just to, this will be a little bit different than typical probably, but to be really clear, the association has wanted to take a vote on this, and with some technical glitches that they had today, they were unable to take a vote. So we've had some conversation about how to proceed. It would be my recommendation at this point in time, and also the request of the association, that the board not approve the MOU tonight, and that we bring that back at a future meeting. However, I also think it would be good for the board to hear the contents of the MOU as it currently exists. And if you're willing to give me a little bit of time on something you're not going to vote on, which isn't unusual, I would walk through it.
I move approval.
Let's just get that going. Thank you. All right, so first of all, I want to thank the association, Lindsay, the president, and their UNISERV rep and members of the executive council for their work on this. We sat down also, especially want to thank Heather for all of her good work on it. And really, we're in a very unusual year this year. The way that we're doing school, it's different than school's ever been done before. And there's lots of great things about it. There are also some challenges, and I think that the idea of this would be to come to an agreement where we provide relief, support, and also a show of appreciation for the dedication of our teachers to the district, our students, and each other. This is just an agreement with our Teachers Association. We would bring back something with our Classified Association also at a later date, when we've had some opportunity to have some additional thinking about that. There are 6 components to this, and I'd like to walk through them so that you all know them. One of the things I wanted to do is make some kind of a cost estimate on this. It is the math person in me who feels the need to try to make an estimate about what it is that we've got on the table, and I estimate the cost on this at about $503,000 the offer that's being considered here. I'll give you components of that as I go through it, and I can give you methodology, but it isn't very precise, to be quite frank, but it's actually probably pretty close. So to start off with, the first part of the agreement would be that we would provide each staff member with an additional personal day. And part of the idea of the additional personal day is that it could meet the individual needs of each staff person, because there are staff people who would say, I don't want to take a personal day, there's a lot of substitute work involved with that and so on, I want to be here every day. But instead, I do get, if I have an unused personal day at the end of the year, I do get paid at a rate which would be commensurate with the substitute rate for the day. And if I misspeak on any of this, I hope that you'll correct me, Heather, please. And so that would be on the table, or I need a day. And this would be the day that I would choose. And so it would give people an opportunity to choose a day that makes sense for them when they need a respite. So they get to choose that day. They can use it with pre-approval from their supervisor. We do have some blackouts on it because we're having a hard time getting substitutes. So like at the beginning of winter break, end of winter break, that kind of thing, where that we have large vacations where we could see a number of people who want to take off at the same time. So there are some blackout dates on it that are around long breaks. We also committed in this, because there is a substitute issue when a person has a personal day, that we would add 4 additional licensed staff into a substitute pool for the district, so that when people do take their personal day, we have enough people theoretically to cover it. And 4 should cover the number of days that we think are likely to be taken over the course of the year. And so it doesn't do us very much good to have personal days if we don't have subs to cover, and so that's an effort to do that. So that's part 1. That's about $360,000 by my estimation. There's some guesses in there as to, you know, who's gonna do what, but it does cover all the personal days for the year between now and then for the additional 1. Including classified, yes, that cost also includes classified, with the assumption that that would also come to classified. Thank you. The second one is bargaining unit members can schedule their vaccine or booster during non-student contact time, and bargaining unit members can be granted up to 1 day of additional paid sick leave if they have an adverse reaction after receiving a COVID-19 vaccination shot. It could be a shot, it could be a booster. We think most of our staff at this point in time are vaccinated, and so more than likely it would be have an adverse reaction to a booster shot. It would give some of our employees, particularly those who do not have a large sick leave bank a day, to make that work. And that's a new reality for us, right? That we have people who don't feel very good sometimes after their booster, and we just want to acknowledge that. I calculate that at about $33,000. Number 3, for the 21-22 school year, we've agreed to hold all license evaluations as follows. So 1 evaluation for contract teachers who are on their evaluation cycle. Right now, our contract teachers have an evaluation every other year. They're on cycle. Typically, they have 2 evaluations or 2 reviews at that time. This would have just 1 every other year for this year. And then 2 evaluations for first and second year probationary teachers. So a first year teacher or a second year teacher who are probationary would have 2 in the course of the year. And then for our third year probationary, there would be 3. Third year probationary is the year we make a decision where they move from probationary to contract teachers, and so we want to make sure that we had ample opportunity in the third year to observe. It doesn't include, this doesn't preclude regular administrative walkthroughs. Administrators walk through classrooms all the time. That's not a formal evaluation. And we may have some staff that need additional support, and in those instances, we reserve the right to provide additional support and have additional evaluations. But the cycle would be 3, 2, 1, and 1. Under this agreement. This meets the requirements of the state. It keeps us in compliance with Division 22. It's less than what our contract calls for, but it does meet the state requirement, and it provides some respite for teachers and administrators, quite frankly. And has no associated cost. Number 4 would be how professional growth goals are set for the year. And this would call for 2 goals around social, emotional, or behavior, one or the other, and relevant instructional content standard around student learning and growth, but oftentimes it is referred to as SLGG. That is a requirement of the state student learning and growth goal. But we would have this not associated with smarter balanced assessment tests unless the teacher preferred for it to be that way. For those teachers who already have set goals for the year that they like, they can keep those if they choose, or they could make adjustments at the midterm check-in. Number 5 would be a cap. Currently, and this has been this way in this district for a really long time, when teachers cover another teacher's class, if we have a lack of substitutes during their prep, if they accumulate enough hours to account for a work day, they can be paid at the substitute rate for that work day as an additional day of work. And the contract is always capped at 2 days over the course of a year. We've had a hard time finding substitutes this year. It's not easy to do. We've had a number of employees already do 2 days or more as we move into this year. We've had some employees do that. And we anticipate that even though we're doing better with substitutes, this is going to be an ongoing issue for us. And so in an effort to recognize that, we've said that there could be up to 6 days. So from 2 days to 6 days, if people cover enough classes over the course of the year, that you get 6 additional days of compensation, and that compensation is at the substitute rate. Yes. And to break that out a little bit further, there would be up to 3 of those allowed during the first semester, and then 3 during the second semester. Technically, it would be something like this. If a person had 2 or 3 days accrued by the time we get to the semester, they would be paid for those days, either 2 days or 3 days. If they had 2 and a few or 3 and a few, they would be paid for 2 or 3, depending on which they had. And then any additional parts of a day that they had accrued would carry over into the second semester. And then they would have the same setup as they move through the year. However many days they cover for, they get paid for up to 3. And in the MOU, there was a piece here that I think that we missed, and we went back and looked at the existing contract, and this does not say it, but this would give us an opportunity to make a correction, and that is that at the end of the year, they are able to be paid for this time, the sub-rate, in half-day increments. So we had written this agreement as if it always had to be a full-day increment. If I didn't cover a full day, I didn't get any pay, so I could maybe do like a half-day and get nothing for that work. That's not what the contract says, and so we want to make sure that we're meeting that contract obligation that it's paid in half-day increments. So a person could get a half day, a day and a half, 2.5 days, or 3. And lastly, number 6, that in the month of December, this December, that on early release Wednesdays in preparation time, those Wednesdays would be free of district and building administrator established commitments. So they would be, go to the teachers to use for preparation time or to use as they see fit on Wednesdays in the month of December. And then for the remainder of the year, with 4 Wednesdays a month, that 3 of those Wednesdays would also, those early release Wednesdays, would be at the, would be whatever the teacher wanted it to be for those 3 days, right? And then the other one would be district directed. The other Wednesday would be district directed. The district would choose which Wednesdays are which, so which Wednesdays we want to use. And what we also recognize here is that there is a need for the district to be able to continue with professional development and other kinds of work that we have underway. And while we have the one Wednesday to do that, we're worried about stopping some of our work commitments. And so we always have the opportunity and always have had the opportunity to pay people if they spend additional time doing professional learning or professional work on behalf of the district. And so we would acknowledge that we may need to continue to do that. I put a price tag on that of $50,000. For the prep coverage, item number 5, I put a price tag of $60,000. Again, those are very rough estimates, but they are not completely out of thin air. There is some thinking to that. And so that's what we've put forward. I do not recommend with the request of the association and the fact that they haven't had an opportunity to vote, I would recommend that the board not vote on this tonight, but that we be prepared to bring it back to a future meeting for consideration and or approval should the association approve this with the change that I identified in item number 5. And or we have opportunity for discussion.
So I appreciate the work, Mr. Superintendent, and from the union as well. I think, for me at least, I'm ready to approve this the minute it's ready to go. I think we can call it a special within, we have to give 24-hour notice. If it's a single item, I don't know if we do it via Zoom or we all come back here or what, but I've heard, I think we've all heard, and have some understanding of the challenges in the schools and in the classrooms that our team has, and that we need to do everything we possibly can to support them. So when you have it, I'm all for calling a meeting and turning that thing around within 24 hours.
Thank you.
So I don't think anyone's not for supporting this. My question is, I thought we were trying to be ready to what the technical difficulty, what exactly?
Chairman of Superintendent or Board Member Morris.
Yeah. Easy now.
Yeah, easy there. Well, I don't know exactly. I think that the voting mechanism that they used to do that vote didn't work today, and so we're not able to know what their outcome is, and they also asked for us to wait for consideration, and I think that we ought to honor that.
Obviously, we're gonna support it. I just thought we'd have it.
I just had a couple of questions of understanding. So on 1C, it said you're gonna provide 4 licensed staff. Is that for the district or for each school?
That is for the district,
Okay,
yes.
because it kind of, the way I read it could have gone either way, I wasn't sure. So kind of in a pool to move where they need to go.
Well, with the idea that, there would be a certain number of people who decide to take a personal day on any given day, assuming an even distribution, I think 4 staff should cover that. Yeah, one of the things that we have done as a district in order to try to deal with the substitute shortage is have an assigned substitute at each elementary, 2 at each middle, and 3 at each high school. Getting that lined up and in place is not easy, but where we're able to do that has gone very well, and we've helped schools out. And the idea of this would be that we would bring 4 additional on in order to cover this additional personal day.
Well, having school assign substitutes is brilliant. Whoever came up with that, awesome. And then on the $360,000, is that at the value of 1 day for all employees? Is that how that was calculated? I mean,
That is calculated as the value of a personal day for each employee, yes, because they either are going to use it or.
sure, it's the cash value of their,
Yes.
right, okay.
I had a couple clarifying questions. Is this general fund or ESSER? Where are we pulling this money from?
This would be general fund.
What does it do to our budget?
Well, it takes about $500,000 out of our budget. There is some discussion about what our ending fund balance looks like. We calculated about 12.7 at one point in time of the year. The state school fund has changed a little bit. As I've said before, I don't think that's a permanent change, but it has gone up. And so, I think we have the funds to cover this. It's not something I would, want to do every year.
Well, the flip side of that is that I think in one way, shape, form, or another, all of us have committed to doing our very best for schools to be open. And you can't do that without the team in the building to do that. And if this is what it takes to do it, do it.
Right. This could come from general fund or ESSER funds, could it not?
It could come from general fund, it could come from ESSER funds. Our ESSER funds, we've turned in those plans to the state. If we start to spend that money differently, we're taking it from something specifically that we've identified to spend the money on.
Okay.
As opposed to, in our general fund budget, we do the same, right? But
right.
$500,000 is not a huge swing within this budget. It's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but within the totality of the budget, it's not a huge swing. And, we do have dollars in a beginning fund or ending fund balance.
And then down the bottom when it talks about the Wednesdays, and so the teacher can use that time to grade, do lesson plans, what they need to do. What we've heard in a lot of these day of my life letters, is it up to the teacher or is it up to the building principal? As I see, the district is releasing that day, but is it up to the principal or is it up to the teacher?
The idea of this is that it's up to the teacher. They can use it to grade, lesson plan, team with their team, to be used as they see fit to help them do their job more effectively. 3 days a month, January forward to the end of the year, and 1 day a month at the district's discretion or direction.
Still realizing that most of our certified staff have 50+ hours of continuing education credit requirement every year, give or take.
But of our licensed or classified?
Our licensed staff.
Could you say that again?
What is the continuing education credit hours?
I'd have to look it up to get the right number for you. We work with them and teachers track their time and.
I actually don't know, to be honest with you. I should know. It's a cycle. Yeah, it's a cycle it's 180 hours on a 3-year cycle.
Yeah, it's not.
It's something like that.
Yeah. If you break it up, it's roughly
right.
50-ish.
I don't know the exact number, to be honest with you, I just haven't looked at that in a while, something I could look up and bring back to you if you'd like.
No, let us know. We'd be happy, even if we just need to do a quick Zoom meeting to pop on and vote. I think all of us would be willing to.
Yeah, we don't need to get until the 13th of December, so
Right.
if necessary.
Yeah, part of my concern is the Wednesdays are gonna go, so sooner the better. Thank you.
Moving on from that, I know you and I talked about the mask mandates changing before we adjourn. Did you want to cover that, or are we gonna throw that?
Yeah, I can cover that real quickly if you'd like me to. We had a mask mandate change, this last week. And basically said that, children are able to not wear masks outside. When they're outside, they're no longer not required to wear masks. They're able to, they're just not required to wear masks outside. And that's something that's new that the state is allowing. The expectation would be, that's something that, as I understand it anyway, the Oregon Health Authority comes out with, and then it's up to, there is some discretion on the part of the local health authority, which is typically the county authority. In Lynn County, there was an expectation that there would be a decision made at the local school level about this, and the local school level could be the board or the superintendent. And so I sent out a message this last Wednesday that said we're going to move to no masks outside in Lynn County on Monday today. I do think that there's a little bit of confusion about that. We may have had a school or two that wasn't positive about that today. My apologies. We need to make sure that we're communicating really clearly. We had, but obviously if it doesn't get done right, we didn't. So we'll make sure that that's corrected for tomorrow. In Benton County, it's a little bit different. As I understand it, Benton County commissioners, who are the local health authority there, had taken an affirmative vote that they were going to have masks in schools, and tomorrow night they have a meeting where they're going to consider this, and should they decide that they're going to undo that mandate or follow what the state now makes it possible, then our schools in Benton County would have the same rule. Currently, none of our schools that are in Benton County are able to have students with their masks off when they're outside. And that would not go into effect until at the earliest Wednesday, should the Benton County Commissioners take a vote to allow that. If they don't change that, then we would continue to wear masks outside. The other thing that went along with that is a new test to stay allowable. So test to stay basically says that we can use our BioNTech's rapid COVID tests to, when a student is exposed by another student who is determined to have COVID, instead of quarantine, we can test that student immediately, and if the student is negative, they can stay. It's required that we have a permission to test form, that's not exactly the right word, but permission to test form from the parent on file so that we can do that. And I suppose it's possible that a parent could come down and sign that, and then we could do the test, right? But we like to have those on file so that we're not interrupting everyone's day. So to any parent out there that's listening, if you would fill out that permission form, that would be terrific. And if your child is exposed, we'll test. If it's negative, they get to stay. And then there's another test that is conducted within 5 to 7 days. And if the student passes that second test in the 5 to 7 day window, then they stay and there's no quarantine. There is some exceptions to this, just like everything. It's never simple and clean, right? There are some kind of weird things. It only is if the student only gets to stay with that testing scenario if there has been consistent mask wearing. So if the student is exposed to another student who later is determined to have had COVID, and it is during lunch where masks are not being worn, and the student was within close contact of that student, less than 6 feet, for up to 15 minutes, then they cannot do test to stay. The same is true if they're outside and masks are off, and they're close to that student for 15 minutes. The second scenario is very unusual. We rarely have students during recess and that kind of thing that stay next to another student for 15 minutes. It happens, but not very often. If that's the case, and masks were not consistently worn, which they wouldn't be now because they're not wearing masks outside, then there may be a quarantine situation for that individual student. They're not able to test to stay. And the third place where that exists is in athletics, where masks are not consistently worn. And so that would be true in basketball, wrestling, and the like. So there are some caveats to this, but I do think, also, the other part is, if the student is vaccinated, then regardless, they're not required to quarantine, right? So they don't have to do test to stay, they are vaccinated. And so they wouldn't have to go through that at all. And so I think the key takeaway here is that the state is working to reduce the number of mask requirements, and they are trying to get districts away from required quarantines to the degree that we have previously experienced them. And that by and large, we should not be seeing mass quarantines any longer as we move forward. We should be able to, either students are vaccinated or they can test to stay in every instance except where consistent mask wearing was impossible. So that's a lot, but it's the new law, and it's progress.
Anything else, John?
A couple things, maybe just one. At our listening session at Calapooya earlier this month, the issue of mental health needs for some kids at school was expressed. I indicated that I would follow up and see what Linn County could do. And the situation today is, as it was a month ago, that Linn County, countywide, provides between 10 and 15 mental health counselors to schools. Not all counties do that. It, over the years, has been a great resource. It was actually started back in 2001 with a guy named Rick Velasquez. He was actually in Benton County, North Albany grade school at the time. We started it there, and we've had good success with it. However, in the environment we find ourselves in now, everybody's just swamped. And not only is everybody swamped, there's not the resource to hire additional mental health counselors. They're just not available. I mean, the only way you hire them in theory is you get them from somewhere else. And so that's a very competitive market. So we all are doing the best we can with what we have right now. I reached out to the state to talk about a concept to increase the supply, if you will, of mental health counselors. And we continue to talk about that. But I want to acknowledge we had the conversation at a listening session. It was helpful to me for sure, and we're still working on it.
I had a follow-up question to that for Heather. We do the Grow Your Own projects for teachers. Have we started Grow Your Own for mental health counseling?
The Grow Your Own would be, typically it's classroom teachers most people think about, but it also can include any of those key positions within our district. And so obviously counselors would fall into that. If we had somebody saying, I'm going to get my degree and I want to be a school counselor, that person, if they meet all of the qualifications for the whatever grant money we're accessing, we would work with that. So we work within the guidelines of the grant. We talk and we use the term teacher a lot. We really talk about licensed staff. Teacher is just kind of the ubiquitous word for our deans of students and our instructional coaches and our counselors and all of those positions. So we're looking to grow all of our positions in the district to the extent we can with the grant funding.
Perfect, thank you, ma'am, I appreciate it. Anything else, gentlemen? Hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.